Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us for the Maine Growing Commercial Real Estate in 2020 webinar. We're unfortunately doing all webinars for this year because of the pandemic. We'd love to have the meet and greets that we always had in the past, but unfortunately we can't do that this year. So we had to revert to webinars, which have been working out fairly well. I want to thank our sponsors for today: the Downs, J.B. Brown Sons, U.S. Pavement Services, and the Boulos Company. And there is all of our speakers today. And we'll be introducing our moderator, Phil Coates, in a couple of seconds. Oh, I'm sorry, Phil Cote. We want to get that right. And that's me. I'm Rick Kaplan. I am the producer, and I MC and direct and pretty much everything else under the sun. And if anyone is interested in being part of any of our webinars throughout the year, we have about 30 scheduled for 2021, as well as hopefully we'll throw in some live events. And, you know, we'll keep our fingers crossed because our live events have always been well attended. And we also serve a nice buffet breakfast. I'm not sure if that will ever happen again because who knows what's going to be with the new rules. And that's the New England Real Estate Journal. We inform, engage, and connect. We've been around for, well, it's almost 60 years. And if anyone does subscribe to the New England Real Estate Journal, let's see, our annual review is coming up. And that is probably one of our best read issues of the year. It's a fairly large issue as well. And the New England Real Estate Journal isn't just a paper copy. It's also a digital version, which is probably the more popular of all of those. And we also do a daily newsletter. Anyone that's interested in subscribing to that, they can as well. And you can go to www.nerej.com. And we'd love to have you receive our journal. This is our newest program that we have. We put on a corporate roundtable show, and we take corporations throughout the country that would like to just have a roundtable discussion on their company, and it can be viewed. And also, the show is live. It's done once a month, and this will also be on our websites, the recorded version. December 16th, we have companies that have had some acts of kindness during this pandemic. So we look forward to hearing a little bit about what the acts of kindness were. And this is something positive. Although I do think that today's webinar is also going to be a lot of positive information as well, because of some of the things that we're going to be discussing. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for the day is Phil Cote of USI Insurance. Take it away, Phil.
Rick, thanks so much. It's Phil Cote, USI Insurance Services. Again, I kind of gave a little overview earlier, but we're national brokerage, and I practice in our real estate group. And for those of you who've been through in the insurance side the last 12 months, you may not see me as the best guy, right? Because insurance rates are going crazy. We're certainly trying to help our clients mitigate the marketplace, and spending a lot of time doing that recently. So I'm thrilled to be a part of this great group. 2020 is the year that seems to never end, and we want it to end quicker than ever. It's a confluence of 1918, right? The pandemic, the civil unrest of the 60s, economic uncertainty of, the late 20s, early 30s, whatever. Throw that all into one area, and it's been brutal. But the good news is that opportunity presents, and especially with the in the southern Maine area in real estate. And the group that you're going to hear from today, guys, is real estate in southern Maine and in greater Portland. It's opportunity, and the only thing I missed today, I guess, is the eggs and bacon that NERJ usually puts out in a great feast. So, but anyway, I'd like to introduce the panel today. And starting out with Drew Sigfridson. He's the Managing Director of the Boulos Company. Drew, if you want to say hello. And next on the panel, Vin Veroneau, the part of the French Connection. Vin is the President, J.B. Brown. Peter Michaud, taking the lead in the French Connection area there. He's the partner in the Downs project. And Dan Bacon is a development manager at the Downs. So these gents are the folks that are tons of information that we hope helps all of the folks on the phone and the virtual call here today. Portland, Maine's near and dear to my heart. It's I live in Newburyport, Mass, so about an hour away or so. And for what it offers for hospitality, the restaurants, the education, Southern Maine, University of Southern Maine, and my son actually went to Bowdoin College, and I'm a little lighter in the wallet for it, but I can tell you it was well worth it. And in that regard, the transportation, the Portland Jetport, the rails, the bus services, the healthcare, teaching hospital. I mean, it's not every place in the country you can get all of that thrown together, but Portland offers it. And biotech, and yes, insurance, center of excellence as well. So, Drew,
Phil,
I know.
Excuse me, Phil. Before we go on, I forgot to mention that anyone that is interested in putting submitting a question to the panelists, you can put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Anyone that wants to put their contact information, you can put it in the chat box, and that way, anyone that would like to connect with you, they'll be able to scroll through the chat box and see all the contact information. Excuse me for that, Bill, and you can.
Not at all, Rick. No problem. I mean, it all good dialogue for sure. So, Drew, one of the questions I'd like to ask you is, Maine's growing residentially. On the commercial investment side, what are you seeing for interest from, both in and out of state investors? And what do they have to gain by looking at the wonders of Portland and greater Portland?
Sure. Well, thanks, Phil. As I was preparing for this a little bit, and we were talking yesterday, I've noticed a change since March in terms of the amount of activity and calls we're getting for interested parties looking at Portland and looking at Maine as a potential place to invest and develop. I feel like historically people have thought of Maine as vacation land, and they think that it's a great place to come and have a house on the lake or have a house on the ocean and just come to visit for the month of August and then leave. And recently, or they have their kids go to one of the schools here, and so they just come in, go out for a nice dinner, and then leave. And
Hello.
This past summer, we have had more inquiries from.
Yep.
Hello.
Somebody should mute. If you're not speaking, it might help. Please.
Peter, it's coming through. Oh, there we go. It's muted. Yeah. So we're finding some of these a different group that's looking at investing in Maine and looking at investing in Portland. Folks that have historically only focused on major markets and first-tier markets are starting to think, when you look at a New York or a Chicago or a San Francisco, I mean, those places are really decimated right now. They're not able to go and occupy their office spaces, and there's a real fear as to what is this going to look like going forward? And where can we find some of these great secondary cities or tertiary markets that have greater access to the outdoor environment, more space, a little bit more lesser population, but also good quality education, good quality place to live. And Portland is on the map for hitting all of those, those benefits. And so we're starting to really find some people that are looking to make investments here and do developments here that prior to the pandemic really hadn't focused on Maine. And I think, anecdotally, we're hearing a lot more people coming and investing in just their homes and looking for, to own a piece of Maine to live here. I think a lot of those people are going to stay and find themselves here permanently rather than just a second home.
Well, we want to tell people all about it, but not too loudly, right? Because we want to keep some of it for ourselves. It's a great place for sure. Thanks, Drew. And, Vin, as it relates to maybe some ground up investing and in a new commercial development, can you maybe talk a little bit about that versus, maybe rehabbing existing inventory?
Yeah, so we have I've been at J.B. Brown for about 16 years. And when I first started, there was a fair amount of existing, I would call them legacy properties that we spent a fair amount of time bringing into the 21st century. And then as sort of the market pricing increased, as interest rates went down, we sort of looked and determined that it was more advantageous for us to develop ground up product on land that we owned either on the peninsula or in the surrounding areas. And so that's what we have been doing to date. And we've been pretty successful in able to broaden our asset base. So we built a hotel back in 2014. A couple of years ago, we built an industrial building. That market has been very strong, probably the strongest of all of the markets. Next would be residential, and then we've done some residential development that we originally did ground up residential development as a way to broaden and diversify our asset pool. For one reason or another, we've ended up selling them as condominiums, which is not the business we're in. We're a net sort of buyer or acquirer. But because of market dynamics, we opted to sell them just because we thought there was a mismatch with respect to the amount of supply coming into the market and the increasing demand, especially from people that had some connection to Maine, whether like you, they had a child that went to school in Maine and they enjoyed it and they're moving back and buying a second place, or they have children here and grandchildren. So that market's been pretty robust. And our last development was currently under construction is 51 residential units that we hope to keep as residential. We did take a pause with some of the new regulations that have been recently passed in citizen referendums that I think make it a little bit more difficult, but not so much that we're going to pivot on this one. We are going to keep it as residential rather than condominium, but there's some rent control referendums that just passed in Portland that are a bit problematic, but not insurmountable at the current time. So overall, I would say industrial's been very strong, residential a close second, and the balance is.
That's terrific. Yeah, terrific information. And, and it's almost in reverse, it seems now, right? Residential driving industrial versus the old days, right? You'd have a big industrial component. People would have to relocate to go to work there. But it seems that there's almost a different element now. And to that in the residential side, I'd like to ask Peter, down on the Downs project, what are you seeing by way of local and national trends as it relates to, developments like the Downs and how that affords folks opportunities?
We're definitely seeing I think I'd start by saying, in 2019, kind of pre-pandemic, we're seeing about a 27% gain in residential growth. I mean, it was really historic. More recently, with the pandemic and the shift of population that we're seeing up to 30% of our buyers be out of state for our residential side. And even more importantly, or as important, the calls that we receive in the Maine properties for people looking for residents, could be some of our apartment buildings, could be new homes, whatever it may be, condos and so on. Those phone calls, I think Maine Properties receives could be up to 300 a day. It's massive. And we're seeing a major uptick, north of 30% of that number being out-of-staters, people looking for residents here. Obviously driven by some by the pandemic, but also the realization of these bigger companies and their recognition of being able to work from home and work remotely.
Mm-hmm. So as it relates to, master planning, you look at the Downs website, it's unbelievable. I remember as a kid, my parents used to take me up to watch the harness races there. And I think it's a lot more than that now. So how does master planning, drive decision process?
Well, it's a much more philosophical approach to how you're going to build a bigger project like this. So you kind of, you need to have a vision that goes beyond where your operating scope currently is. That's a major piece. And Dan and his team and the rest of our team, they do a great job with that. I cheerlead them, essentially. But, remember, the master planning component goes hand in hand with the zoning that we have there. We have very liberal zoning. It's called the Crossroads Zone, which allows mixed use to be built. So we're essentially building a community. Like the town of Scarborough and the surrounding area, particularly the town of Scarborough, they really don't have a downtown area. And it's something that their comprehensive plan is called for. That's why the zoning has been set up the way it is in its liberal nature. So we're in a place where we're actually building a community with the downtown. So when you think about master planning and its importance, we've got to be transparent with all the stakeholders, including the neighbors and the local community, with how we handle our planning. So it provides that platform to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of segues to my question to Dan. And Dan, how does the master plan at the Downs in particular, what were the most important factors of laying out all of the various areas in the development? What were those, I guess, challenges and what have you seen there?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And Peter did a great kind of introducing the value of master planning. Early on, really the key was to, as Peter would say, hit some singles in terms of some initial development, create some initial momentum, and capitalize on where the utilities are closest to the fringes of the project. And doing that in a way that was, fairly quick to create activity, but also do it in a way that has, our eyes on the future and be thinking multiple steps ahead. So we had to really plan out, okay, how are we coming into the site efficiently and in a way that kind of hits those singles, gets some activity, hits the right markets. And I think we did that quite well. Residential, doing a mixed residential phase is the first phase with a range of housing choices that were in demand. And then quickly pivoting to light industrial on the actual opposite end of the project to really kind of hit that market that Vin outlined as being strong, certainly in Greater Portland. But those are two very different things and don't necessarily belong next to each other. So that's where we had to be efficient, but also have our eyes on the future to see how it all kind of knits together. And that's where master planning is key in making sure we figure out not only where we're going tomorrow and the next day, but where we're going 5 years out and how it knits together. So we did that. And then also with the eye on, okay, when we're getting past those phases, we really want to create that kind of mixed use plan community that Peter mentioned, and figuring out what's the best location for that. And in designing for it and designing our infrastructure to kind of feed into that center while we activate those initial phases.
And how has, you know, the 10,000-pound gorilla COVID-19 impacted what you thought you could do versus what reality might be?
Well, COVID-19, I think, has reinforced our instincts on the first few kind of market sectors, residential, as Peter indicated, and light industrial. So it enabled us to continue to focus on those and maybe, frankly, kind of speed up build out of light industrial given demand. So that's been maybe, I don't want to put it that way, more of a positive side of, unfortunately, the COVID-19 situation. On the office side, and Peter may want to kind of jump in here too, that's slowed down. You know, office is on pause right now in general, given we're all in our living rooms right now versus at the office. Well, I guess Drew's at the office, but so that's where we see more of an effect, and a short-term effect on a new coffee shop or a new restaurant. You know, those are key components of what people want to see in a mixed-use community. And so those are going to go a little bit slower right now, given the state of those sectors.
Right. So Vin, J.B. Brown is currently developing a mixed-use building on the peninsula in Portland. Can you kind of elaborate on the impacts COVID may have had on that particular project too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that initially when we were doing our outside construction and the site work and the framing of the building, it was not as much of a problem. As COVID has sort of been a little bit more enduring than everyone had hoped, and we've moved inside, it has really slowed down the development process of the building. And I think it's probably added 4 months to our construction time, based upon some labor shortages in general. I mean, I think the trades right now have a little bit of a labor shortage right now, but also in reduced size of crews because of social distancing has added a little bit of time constraint. And there's been a little bit of supply chain disruption. We were able to buy out early on, so it hasn't been terrible, but it has certainly had an impact. I think the flip side is, I think the market is strong on the residential side. Will only get a little bit stronger, especially as we move into the warmer weather. So maybe coming online in April versus January or December is not a bad thing. And as I said before, you know, sort of the industrial market continues to be strong. So that the COVID impact has been a little bit choppy, like it has been with the operating companies.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Hey, Phil, I might just insert a comment that you touched on earlier. It was around land and master planning. And you had asked me, you know, what we're seeing for investment activity and demand. We've seen more interest in developers and occupiers of real estate, operating companies looking to buy land. Sometimes on speculation. And I would say this is a newer development, you know, something that we really haven't seen as much up until the last couple years. Peter and his team were probably ahead of the curve on this with taking down the downs. The problem that we have in Maine, like you look at it from an aerial and you think, oh, there's a tremendous amount of land you could develop anywhere, right? But when you take out the land area that's not zoned correctly, the land area that has wetlands or ledge, and the land area that's not serviced by utilities or by other, infrastructure, you're really diminishing the availability of available, developable property, good quality developable land. And, even Peter's project has been a massive investment in infrastructure costs. And this was right in the middle of Scarborough. So that's one thing that we're seeing now, not only for solar and wind and industrial developments, but also for residential developments. So I just want to comment on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was going to ask you, Drew, about impact COVID-19 has had, with respect to, has it materially changed any considerations of developers, investors when they look at new projects that you're maybe involved with?
We don't have COVID in Maine. I
You
know if
don't?
you've heard.
It doesn't exist?
No.
I'm coming.
Yeah. Actually, it was in the paper today that it was, it's not a good stat because we've had increased cases here, but we're the second lowest rate in the country, second only to Hawaii, and so I think we all can be really proud of that. But it has been very difficult. I can't emphasize enough how difficult it's been on so many companies, business owners, property owners, and really it's painful to watch because these hardworking entrepreneurs oftentimes don't have a lot of backstop, and for no fault of their own, they find themselves in very difficult situations. So, when the offices are not occupied, you don't have people going and buying sandwiches and buying coffees and going into the yoga studios and working out in the middle of the day or after work. And it's been really difficult on a lot of people. So, yes, we have encountered some difficult situations. We've had to work on some modifications of leases and terms, but I think a lot of folks are feeling like we are turning a corner and that there's optimism, looking ahead. And I've been very surprised at the resilience of a lot of businesses. I think a lot of people in March and April were expecting a very, very bad year in 2020, including us. I mean, people were not making decisions. They were not making commitments. They put everything on pause really for a full, March, April, May. There was not a lot of decisions being made. And then there's just a tenacity, right, in kind of the human spirit, but also just in business owners to say, okay, we've got to pivot and we're going to figure out a way to make it work. And people got on with, living this new way and figuring out how to make business work. And I think by and large, a lot of people have eked out a decent year and have some optimism looking ahead.
I appreciate those comments because in the insurance industry, it's been an extreme challenge too. And, we're trying to help our clients certainly manage it with the risk control elements in the most efficient fashion possible. So, switching down to the residential side, Peter, you're saying you're getting 300 calls, plus concerning, property habitational opportunities down at the Downs. And so COVID-19, has it had kind of a boost? Has it added anything just because of how nice Maine is and people want to perhaps relocate for all the reasons we've been talking about?
I think it has. It certainly has had an impact. I think, to Drew's point, just overall the ability to pivot and pivot quick enough. When I think about, the drag of COVID-19, anytime you have business plans that you're running or strategy, over 2 or 3 years, and then you need to pivot the company and pivot the team, there's quite a delay. And I think what Drew was referring to was 2 things. One, the natural delay that you get when you have to kind of tear down everything you had standing up in terms of plans, and then you need to recast those plans. And you got to go back through your team, go back through your people, make sure that, you know, number one, we're protecting our biggest assets, which is our employees. And two, these plans will work over the period of time that can, you know, to Dan's point, hit a single, hit a double. The real difference here with this COVID piece is residential. I think when I think about it, just from a sheer business point of view, we need to be able to get up at the plate, and rather than trying to hit a home run, we got to hit a single, we got to hit a double. We got to treat people fairly. And you know, you kind of move into a different philosophy where, you know, folks do want to come into Maine. Some folks can do it in certain price range. Other folks have to be in other price ranges. The ability to pivot is key. And I think what we've done really, really well, thankfully for our team and their horsepower in terms of their ability to think on their feet, we offer many products, many different price points. And those various price points are not necessarily right up the middle. They're a little on the high side. They could be a little on the low side in terms of what we're offering. So we're trying to cater to a broader group. I think that's part of the success that we're experiencing during these unfortunate times. Keep in mind, you know, the construction industry is deemed essential. We feel extremely blessed over that. And we had one goal in mind when this all hit in February and March, and I'll share it with the group. I think I'm very proud of it. We had one goal, and our goal was that we send no one home. We take care of our employees, we take care of our families, and the businesses will do just fine. And we've been very successful. No one intended this to last this long. But to Drew's point, there was this lockup time when people didn't know where to pivot. We're now learning where to pivot. People in Maine are industrious, they're tough, they're family oriented, and they're migrating accordingly. You can just see it with you know, people wearing their masks and being out on the road, and people are trying to survive, trying to figure out a way to make it work.
Hey Phil, Peter's a difficult client. He thinks that, I was just looking at our numbers, right? We have 22 out of 35 lots under contract or sold in the Innovation District at the Downs. This is for phase 1 and phase 2, 22 out of 35, and he thinks that's a single or a double.
You know, I don't understand these realtors. They just show up and all, you know, it's magic.
It does it sells itself.
Yeah.
Well, what I heard is that, you know, amen to what we're discussing here is that, you know, you build it from the community out, right? You don't wait for it to trickle down from the top because it never gets there. So I'm thrilled to hear that. I always known Mainers as, you know, independent, hard driving folks that are smart and get things done. So that's terrific stuff. I wanted to ask quickly, just to the group in general, are you seeing, as I, you know, look at my age and looking forward 10 to 12, maybe 15 years, given I have to pay some Bowdoin College loans, what are you seeing from folks who are settling down to retire? I mean, are you seeing that have an impact in Greater Portland?
I can just speak to that a little bit. We're working with a few housing developers that are looking to build independent living communities, assisted living communities. There are some 55 and over projects in development. Actually, at the Downs, there's a 72 unit of affordable project that's 55 and over, I believe. And so there is quite a bit of that activity in the market right now.
Could I get an early price fix, perhaps, if I discuss with the right people?
You're on the list.
All right, thanks.
Yeah,
Any
I
other
second
comments
that.
on
So,
that? Demographic changes, perhaps?
we've spent a lot of time focusing on condominium type housing. We're designing some townhouses for the project. So really kind of denser housing. and having a fair amount of success that, you know, new ideas take a little while to trickle up to Maine. So these aren't new necessarily nationally new concepts, but we're seeing a lot of interest in smaller lots, in more compact housing, and really more about being in a place versus having a lot of elbow room or being at the end of a dead end road. So, and it's really, I think it's a lot of empty nesters, retirees, and then the other end of the spectrum, the more of the millennial generation. So, and that's working well with the Downs, because we can have that type of density and that type of setting. You know, on the residential side, I still think there is good market for, you know, more elbow room, but we're seeing growth in the denser living for sure. And I think, you know, Vin certainly is on the peninsula. The Downs is, we call it suburban, and it's, I'm not slurring my speech. It's, you know, a design that's somewhere between
Yes, you
suburban
are.
and urban.
Sorry.
So Vin, could you add anything to that from your perspective?
Yeah, sorry for the technical difficulties. I've been working on getting back on here, so I haven't heard everything. But, you know, our project that we did 63 units on the corner of High Street and York Street in Portland. And I would say 50% of the units were sold to people that came from outside of Portland that aren't using them as permanent housing. It was always interesting when we had literally sold out the project, where you would have people coming up and sheepishly asking, you know, how's your project going? You know, and I knew the undertone was, you guys must be losing your shirt, because not many lights were on. And I said, no, we sold 100% of the units, and they'd be shocked. So it has been interesting from that standpoint. It's not something we necessarily expected when we went into the project, but there's a fair amount of people that are buying them. Some living here part-time, some people renting them, but want to have a sort of a stake in the ground for when they make a decision 4, 5, 10 years down the line. So,
Well, it's interesting. You know, I just had this crazy flashback that I'm Peter Marshall on the Hollywood Squares. I don't know if any of you guys can remember. I might be dating some of, but yeah, I feel like Peter Marshall here. But anyway, with that in mind, out-of-state investment, we talked a little bit about that. You know, Drew, given the nuances of the local markets, you know, if you're looking at outside investors, what else might they need to know extending their presence into Maine, other than what we've been discussing so far? I mean, business ecosystem is something that we kind of chatted about in the prep. So I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that.
I mean, the yields are better for the most part. I mean, you know, we find people coming out of Boston and New York and looking at some of the investment properties that we have available for sale here, and they feel like the yields are, you know, 100 to 200 basis points better than what they can find in some of the more competitive major markets. So that's changing. I will say that, you know, for projects of scale up in this market, whether it be really high quality office, industrial, retail, you know, we are finding very strong pricing and low cap rates for really high quality investments. And there's not a lot of that product available. So when it does come available, there's a lot of competition, and you know, really it sells at kind of record pricing. So, you know, from just a macro level, you know, looking at the market in general, we don't have a lot of speculative construction. You know, most construction that happens is purpose built for a particular user, or there's a lot of research that's been done to show that the market demand is there to be able to fill it. And so, you know, we don't go through a lot of boom and bust cycles in Maine. You know, we're really, it's mostly organically grown. A lot of the companies here, you know, have a certain level of conservatism, and they grow organically, but they do grow. So, you know, the major industries that are here, you know, specifically in Greater Portland, are like banking, engineering, finance, legal, accounting, and then we have some niches in life sciences, biotechnology, and in insurance. And when you look at those market sectors, they tend to be good, constant, organic growth engines.
Does Peter Michaud had mentioned earlier, I wrote it down, the liberal zoning provisions, maybe, I don't know if that's particular to Scarborough or if that's Maine in general. Would anyone on the panel like to discuss that? How, if it's liberal, does that enrich opportunities?
Dan, I think that's best for you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So Scarborough, well, for my background, I actually worked for the town of Scarborough in my past career. So I had something to do with the zoning. It wasn't a straight line to jump in with Peter, but not executing the zoning. But the zoning is set up to be really more kind of code as you go and respond to the market, but create a cool community in the right kind of place. So it's benefited certainly the downs to be responsive to the market, Phil. There's other zones in the town of Scarborough that do that to a lesser extent. And I think there's certainly other communities around Greater Portland that have progressive zoning that's mixed use, that's more kind of almost form-based versus conventional. But I would say it's scattered. And in a lot of cases, in other communities, the project has to go through like a contract zone or a special zone to actually achieve kind of modern design. So I think to answer your question, I think there's opportunities in the right towns and the right locations, but there's also a lot of kind of lost opportunity because the zoning hasn't caught up to or isn't contemporary in terms of what the market wants.
Mm-hmm. So zoning being one regulation, what about other regulations that I guess present challenges to developments, whether they be rehabs or whether they be ground up stuff? I'll ask the panel and see what you say.
I think I have one quick comment. I mean, when you think about regulations, it's a pretty broad bucket that you're looking at. I think when we think about them, we think about the spirit in which they're organized and what it is they're trying to accomplish. So when you look at the difficulty of them, the ones that are that have a shelf life that you can manage within your project time frame, you deal with them. And then there's a group of regulations that sometime, the rules are the rules, and they do not adhere to your timeline. Those become, impediments to business. So we kind of look at them objectively, in a sense that, we need to check the boxes, we need to do the right things, we need to sustain ourselves and sustain our projects, and make sure that there's something we're proud of. Yet we need to accomplish business, and we need to be the drivers of those timeframes, the investment community in those timeframes. Those are my thoughts.
Vin, do you have any thoughts on those? Like regulations which may act as impediments or challenges, if you will?
Yeah, so you all sort of deal with the normal zoning that every community has, and some communities are easier process and some are more difficult. But as Peter said, those are knowns, you negotiate that. Where you have more of a problem, specifically in Portland right now with the referendums that just happened, with rent control, and more importantly with inclusionary zoning. I think those are the rules that don't make sense for new development. For example, on the residential side, we could not make the numbers work right now to build a market rate project in Portland. And so we will just allocate our resources to other communities. Fortunately, we own land in 3 other communities around Greater Portland. And so until that is rectified, we won't stop developing or looking for opportunities, but there'll be one less place to do it for a little while. And so Peter said, I mean, that has more of an immediate and effect that you just got to wait till it changes before you're going to sort of take on that risk.
Mhm.
Bill, I might just add one other comment, which is, most everyone who lives in Maine, they love the outdoors. Some of the benefits of Maine are, the clean air and the clean water and the forests, et cetera, et cetera. And so, we all the developers in the community understand that a lot of these regulations are in place for a reason, and respect that and know that there's a process that you have to go through. They all just want to know what those rules are, that they're predictable, and that there's a reasonable time frame associated with them.
Has the aforementioned citizens referendum changed that process, Vin, at all?
Well, I think it may have sped up a few projects that were sort of on people's horizon that they sort of got in under the wire, so they weren't impacted or constrained by them. But development's not an easy game, right? And so you got all sorts of things to deal with, whether it's neighborhoods and groups, which we've had really good success sort of engaging with neighbors early on. It's part of the process. It's a known. The referendum questions are much more difficult because what's happening is they're making laws that normally go through a more robust public process. And it has a lot of unintended consequences. They're just not well thought. And they happen. And so I think the bigger question is how is a referendum changed going forward so it's not so easy to place something on the ballot? Because we really have a referendum every time there's an election to put the people in office or out of office that aren't providing what the community wants. Because there's no question in Portland that there's a need for an array of housing, and I think everyone agrees with that. It makes an interesting community. The question is what group or what subset of the community picks up that burden, or is it spread more broadly? And I think that's where the struggle comes in.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, how is the quote old Maine, the fishing, the industry in downtown Portland merging in with the biotech and that industry, and how is that impacting the overall change, or I guess I don't know if change is the right word, but kind of blending of demographics? I'm just interested to hear what you think of that, because I remember I go up to downtown Portland, go to Jay's, right, on the water. I used to do that, and you hear about all the stories of the fishermen. But how is all of that blending together going forward? I'm just curious about that.
I'm not sure if that was a question for me or for
Anybody,
Drew, but I'll take
general,
a quick stab at it. Listen, there's always conflict, especially when you have industries or dynamics that change. I mean, I've grown up in Portland, so I've been here for 50 plus years, and I can say that Portland's changed a lot. It's a lot nicer than it was in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and I don't think anyone wants to go back to that. Mm-hmm. So over the long term, it's really beneficial, but during that process, there are slices of time where it's very controversial. I mean, the late 80s, when they built Chandler's Wharf, there was sort of a battle cry of the fishermen are being forced out. Now, that's an industry that has its issues and doesn't need as much space as it has. And you can't romanticize about sort of hanging on to something that just because it has a history, you sort of acknowledge it and work around it. And I think for the large part, the stakeholders have had reasonable discussions and made accommodations that hasn't been perfect for anyone, but has worked. And I think that process could continue, but it can't continue in a referendum form. Mm-hmm. Happens all the time. I mean, traffic is always an issue, you know, noise is always an issue, and you just have to manage through those.
Bill, to Vin's point, you know, that no one likes change, right? That's always, certainly in Maine, it seems to be very hyphenated. And I would say that when I think about Portland in the years we've been here, which is all of our lives, I've seen a shift from it being kind of a commercial, industrial type environment to consumer driven. And with that consumer driven business comes all the various pivoting that needs to happen to support it. And to Vin's point, I think there is a slow move to do that and do it well. I think they've done a pretty good job down on the waterfront, keeping a mix. Sprague built just a world-class facility on the, I believe it would be the south side of the bridge, southwest side of the bridge.
West, yeah.
Yeah. What is west side? Yeah. And I'm French. Give me a break, will you? It's the Nord. No. They've built a heck of a facility there to essentially service all of those other piers that were sprinkled amongst the waterfront. So I think,
yeah, I mean, we do have a great mix, right? And you know, you've got the container ship that comes in. Imeskip operates its North American headquarters out of Portland, Maine, and it's a direct connection to Europe. We have world-class boatyard. We have the fishing industry. We have seafood processing. We have all of those things on the waterfront, as well as you know, one of the state's largest law firms is right on one of the wharfs. So there is that mix, and it does seem to work. I think it's part of what makes Portland great is the mix of the industries and also the socioeconomic diversity. You know, that we have on the same street. You have that level of diversity, and that's part of what makes Portland great. And you know, that's part of what these people's referendum are about, is they're trying to maintain that. Now they're not always doing it the right way, but I think that's part of what the effort is about. But you know, we have at this point universities like the Rue Institute of Northeastern is headquartered here in Portland. You have teaching hospital, like you mentioned earlier, with Maine Medical. And you know, over the past 10, 20 years, some of our local companies and some of these major institutions just continue to grow here. And that is going to continue, and it's just going to be a delicate balance that we have to try to work through. And as Vin said, it can get messy sometimes.
Well, I can, you know, certainly we have similarities where I live in Newburyport with the seaside element and the folks that have been there for, you know, in Newburyport for hundreds of years. But it's part of the allure, right? I mean, it's part of the blending and to see the new and the old working side by side. It's kind of cool, you know.
Yeah.
It's not.
I mean, this wasn't a tourist destination. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, Portland. You know, people would drive by Portland and go to Acadia and go to Baxter Park. Nobody came to Portland, really. It wasn't until the Hilton Garden Inn was built, and then the hotel industry started to look at the star reports and see what kind of revenue that thing was producing. And then it really started to gain an attraction. I mean, before COVID, we were up to over 120 cruise ships coming into Portland each season. So it's really on the map as a tourist destination.
Is $3 Dewey's going to open again, or is that still shuttered?
It's open again.
Is it? Oh, I'm excited. I'm coming up.
Yeah, come on up, Phil.
I am coming up. But I know, Rick, you wanted to leave some time for questions from the group, and we have some of that right now, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on some of the questions that have come in because we have a number of them. And I want to get to the first one, and I'm not sure if we even touched it. And I want to try to get to these that might be something that Drew would be able to answer as well, because he's going to have to cut out a little early. Let's see. The first one is from Patrick Kaplan. In light of the recent setback to the proposed large residential development in Freeport and Drew's comments, it seems that community planning and comprehensive plans are geared toward the normal trickle of migration into Maine and not the boom we are currently seeing. Is it time to bring back the state planning office to help guide the discussion about where we can put new residents and new business growth, so we can focus on zoning changes and extending services to new areas for development while being protective of the environment?
It's a great point. I think Dan can probably speak to it more, but historically, you do a 10-year comprehensive plan. You talk about where the path of development is, and you start to rezone those areas as part of a comprehensive plan, which is negotiated and agreed upon by your community. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would just add to Drew's response too that Maine is obviously part of New England, and New England's famous for being local in terms of zoning. And I think it's sometimes that's at a detriment, because I think regional, like Greater Portland is working as a region right now, and obviously a strong and growing one. So having maybe more than state planning, it's a little bit better regional coordination around where growth should occur, and more kind of consensus around where regional growth should occur, and to capitalize on assets. Like, I live in Freeport, so I was actually surprised by the level of response to that proposal without a lot of information. So I think there's a role for regional planning that can help try to smooth out those reactions.
This is another question that we've gotten from a few people, and I don't want to go through all of the ones that ask us, so I'm just going to ask it in general. And answer this briefly, if anyone can answer it briefly. Is any solar or wind energy development projects going on in Maine that you know of?
Many. The state changed the tax incentive rules associated with solar development after Governor Mills was elected, and they really have a priority as part of their administrative or part of their administration to grow alternative energy here in the state. And so there are many solar developments, and mostly solar, I would say. There are a couple of wind, but more solar at this point.
Okay. There's another question. What is the pricing difference between the Portland area and the central Maine area, like Lewiston and Bangor?
That's a broad question. So it's
very broad.
I mean, probably from an industrial perspective, you're going to be somewhere in the 80% of Greater Portland, depending on the quality of the product. On the residential side, it's maybe I don't know, somewhere in the 60% type range. Office, probably similar. So there is a discount, Central Maine, there is a discount.
Anyone have anything else to add to that? No.
Infrastructure, Rick, infrastructure really drives those variances, how close the infrastructure is, whether there's gas, fiber optics, those type of things. That's a big piece of what Drew's referring to.
Okay. Have multifamily housing rental, not condo, values reached the level that new non-subsidized construction is it feasible? I'm not sure I understand that. Maybe you understand it better than me.
Vin, you want to take that?
Yeah, well, I would say that market rate apartment rents work probably in the surrounding communities. I don't think they work currently in downtown Portland, or in Portland at all, with 25% of your units needing to be subsidized. But definitely, I think you can build market rate in, communities like Scarborough, Westbrook, South Portland, and make the numbers work.
Now, this is a real important question because I'm not sure if any of you can answer this. Is Maine a good state for real estate development? Obviously, you all feel it is, but I think people outside the market want to know if they should make that choice as well.
It's not for the faint of heart. And I've talked with a few developers that have come up here from Boston that have done developments all throughout other parts of New England, and they've made comments to me that that Portland in particular is extremely hard to develop in. And I think that all real estate is local. One of the people that was on our introductory call there talked about that, and it's so true. I mean, you need to know your local market, and there were quite a few developers that tried to buy the Downs before Peter did with his partners, and they're all from Scarborough, the ones that bought it. And there were developers looking from all over New England that couldn't make it work. So I'd just say that's a cautionary tale, maybe.
Yeah, Rick, I might add one thing to what Drew said. He just triggered a thought. Let's see, the Downs over 17 years, when we did our research, over 17 years was under contract 15 times. And that'll just give you a feel for, I think one of the things here in Maine that's different, I actually have the fortunate benefit, have the experience of doing business up and down the East Coast and over to the West Coast and so on as well in different business segments. And I would say that one of the things in Maine that you got to kind of buckle in for is the sales cycle. It's longer. We're very impacted by certain parts of the winter. Not that it's a lot different than Boston, because it's not. People have that thought in terms of the weather, but the sales cycle seems to be a little longer here. That would be my point.
Well, it is different, Peter, than Boston because their roads are plowed fairly quickly as opposed to being in Boston, where you might have to wait a day.
I think you have trash trucks using plows, don't you, in Boston, or is that New York? I forget.
That's New York.
Okay, that's New York.
Yeah.
Keep it in the family, as they say.
Yeah, that's right.
I have to go to an 11:30, but thank you so much for having me.
Terrific.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.
We appreciate you doing this.
Thanks.
What are specific incentives to develop in Maine? Are there any?
Vin, you want to take that one? Or?
I think every community is a little bit different. I mean, certainly there's tax increment financing that is allowed by the state for a community to give back protect some of their taxable base and use it for, public improvements that are associated with a project. But we typically have not availed ourselves that much of those. I mean, the state has a pretty good a historic tax credit that dovetails into the federal tax credit for anyone redeveloping any of the mills. So I think it's community by community. I don't know what Peter has experienced in their Scarborough development.
I think I agree with Vin. It's community by community, and it's part of it is there's some established programs. There's the opportunity zones. If you go on the website, your Google opportunity zones in Maine, it will actually show you a map where those zones are. Those are pretty favorable. And then I think beyond that, it depends on what you're trying to do. And if you localize the event, perhaps you can bring your incentive programs. You can make them yourself, meaning negotiate it with the community and so on.
All right. Well, I have one more question. I think then we'll call it a close. But do you feel new development in Maine will draw customers, employees from within Maine primarily, or rely on each from adjacent states?
I can say from our experience, we have seen an in-migration from larger metropolitan areas that have the ability to work remotely. And unlike some of the other disruptions in the market where people may have sort of fled New York or Washington, D.C., everyone went back because the ability to work remotely wasn't as robust as it is now. And I don't know that you're going to put that genie back in the bottle. And I think people, when they come here, they want to stay. I mean, I'm involved in an independent school that we have 30 new students from larger metropolitan areas. And the discussion is how sticky are these students? Are these people going to stay? And so there's a fairly good outreach to see. And the initial feedback is, we have no intention of leaving Maine. And so we'll see, time will tell what happens. But a lot of it has been in migration, both from outside of the state and from northern Maine to southern Maine.
To think about, to Vince's point, I could add a couple things. Much to Vince's point, I mean, think about Maine for a second in its rich history with vacation, right? We have it on our license plate. It says vacation land, which means come here for 6 or 8 weeks and get out, right? In that process, a lot of people have bought homes, condos, apartments, whatever. They might have camps on the lake. And a lot of what you're seeing today, to Vince's point, with the sticking of people, a lot of those folks already own homes here. I don't know the percentage. I'd be making it up, but it's pretty substantial. And then you have their families, right? This all kind of triggers a trickle-down effect within the families. And then you have their families saying, gee, I enjoyed my time in Maine. I think I'll come up and buy. So that's to Vince's point, it remains to be seen. No one can really predict that, but the likelihood of remote working, and even if it's 50% of your time, that's still going to bode well for the environment we have. We need to work on infrastructure and so on to support that. But one other point, I do know that these rural communities that might have 20 kids in there in a given class have seen 10 to 15 additions from out-of-staters from New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut. I know of several examples up in the Northwest side, up by Sugarloaf, that those are facts. That's really happening.
Well, we have a few other questions, but we're running out of time, and I want to thank the panel. They did a great job. One of the things, Phil, you did mention to the panel about housing for people of your age group, and they all automatically went to senior housing. Why was that?
Well, time works for us, Rick. All of us. We can't turn it backward, as far as I know. But yeah,
I always consider you a millennial.
Well, hopefully I try to stay fit, but that doesn't work too well. I got the COVID-15 going, right, with all the IPAs and all that other crap I've been doing for the last 6 months. But yeah, we're looking for places to consider, when we're in our next career. That's why I asked the question, demographically, what is it? What are you seeing? And we always love going up to Portland. The best scallops I've ever had in my life were at what the heck's the name of that? 4th Street, is that right? And they asked me, how do you want your scallops? I'm like, cooked. But I got them. I said, what would you recommend? They medium rare. I said, okay, that sounds fine.
So Phil, I was trying to put you in the empty nester bucket. So or millennial. I was,
We're almost there, Dan. I got a young lady that's taking a year off from Harvard because they were going to charge the same amount of money for as in-person classes for remote classes. So she said no. And I agreed wholeheartedly.
Good for her.
Well, I want to thank you, Phil, for moderating today. I want to thank the rest of the panel. Excellent information, a lot of great information, I should say. I also would like to thank our sponsors for today, U.S. Pavement, the Downs, J.B. Brown Sons, and the Boulos Company. I also want to let everyone know this is being recorded and it will be up on the New England Real Estate Journal website. You can go to www.nerej.com/videos, or you could go to our YouTube channel. And if you do go to our YouTube channel, please subscribe. You'll see all our webinars throughout the year, as well as some of our live events and our corporate roundtable TV show, and also our one-on-one interviews. I want to wish everyone a safe and happy holidays.